The roar of the crowd was deafening, a sea of voices rising with every heartbeat. Riverside High's gym was packed, the air electric, the scoreboard burning with tension. Liam Carter stood at the three-point line, sweat trickling down his temple, the weight of the entire season in his hands. The clock was bleeding away its final seconds. The ball left his fingertips, spinning through the lights, slicing the noise in half. It hit the net with a clean, perfect swish. The arena exploded. Riverside was going to the championship. For a fleeting breath, Liam thought this was the moment he would remember for the rest of his life, the night he carried his team to glory. But joy can shatter faster than glass. As his teammates swarmed the court, lifting their arms in triumph, Liam caught the eyes of Coach Brown. There was no pride there, no trace of the victory they had fought for together. The coach's gaze had frozen on the strip of rainbow ribbon peeking from beneath Liam's wristband. That ribbon was nothing more than a quiet piece of himself and anchor, a reminder of who he was beyond the hardwood floor. But under the harsh glare of the gym lights, it suddenly felt like a target. Brown's jaw tightened, his stare slicing through the noise until all the celebration blurred into silence. Liam's lungs felt heavy as the coach beckoned him toward the corner of the court, away from the cameras and cheering students. The music of victory was still pounding in the background. But to Liam, it was gone. Brown's words fell cold and heavy. They were not about the game, not about strategy or improvement, but about the person Liam was. In that instant, the court that had always been his refuge became a place of exile. It was the same polished wood, the same basket, the same crowd still screaming his name, and yet it was no longer safe. As Liam stood there, the laughter of his teammates in the distance felt like it belonged to a different world. He looked up at the bleachers, searching for something familiar, but all he could see were shadows moving, faces blurred by the sting in his eyes. This was supposed to be his night. Instead, it was becoming the moment that would divide his life into before and after. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a truth he didn't want to face began to take shape, that sometimes the loudest rejection isn't a shove or a scream, but a look that strips away your worth without saying much at all. On nights like these, the scoreboard doesn't tell the real story. It's not about the points won or lost, but about whether you're allowed to belong. Liam didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of a fight far bigger than basketball, a fight for the right to exist as himself, in plain sight, without apology. If you've ever stood in a moment where victory was stolen by prejudice, you know that the real battle starts after the buzzer. And it's in those moments that your courage defines you more than any scoreboard ever could. This was Liam Carter's beginning, and you'll want to hear how it ends. Follow Heart's story so you don't miss the rest of what happened when the crowd went silent and the real game began. The next morning, the locker room felt different. The sharp scent of disinfectant, the metallic hum of fluorescent lights, the distant echo of sneakers on the court, and all familiar, yet hollow. Liam Carter stepped inside, expecting the quiet rhythm of his pre-practice routine, but his eyes froze on the space that was supposed to be his. The locker door gaped open. Empty. Every trace of him was gone: uniforms, sneakers, the worn wristband he kept for good luck. In their place was only the stale scent of dust and the echo of absence. From the far end of the room, a smirk cut through the silence. Mason, the player whose quick hands and sharper tongue had always been trouble, stepped forward with a few others at his back. In his palm was the rainbow ribbon. He tossed it across the room, and it struck Liam's chest before sliding to the floor. Mason's voice dripped with disdain, making sure every syllable carried. "Not our kind," he said, the words like nails closing a door that had once been open. Liam bent to pick up the ribbon, his fingers brushing against the cold tile. He straightened, gripping it tightly, refusing to let them see the weight in his chest. But before he could speak, they had already turned away, their laughter echoing against the locker doors. By afternoon, the humiliation would stretch far beyond the team. A scheduled interview with Sports Daily was meant to be about the semifinal win, a chance to discuss strategy, teamwork, and the championship ahead. Liam sat under the warm lights, trying to focus on the reporter's questions. Then came one about Daniel, his partner, his quiet source of support, and once a celebrated player for the same school. Liam smiled, ready to answer with pride. But before a word could form, Coach Brown appeared from nowhere, his shadow slicing through the set. With a single motion, Brown snatched the microphone from the reporter's hand. His voice rang sharp, not in private, but in front of cameras, journalists, and the watchful eyes of scouts in the back row. His statement was final, public, and irreversible. Liam Carter was no longer part of Riverside High's basketball team. No mention of skill, no recognition of the game-winning shot, just an abrupt dismissal for all to hear. From behind, Mason leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a grin curling at the edges of his mouth. It wasn't the victory on the court that mattered to him, it was this moment. Seeing Liam cornered under the weight of authority, stripped of the identity he had built as captain and star player. Liam left the room with the hollow click of the door closing behind him, the noise from inside still spilling out like a storm he couldn't quiet. The building that had once felt like a second home now seemed like a fortress designed to keep him out. Every step to the parking lot felt heavier. The ribbon still clenched in his fist, its colors vivid against the pale lines of his knuckles. In that moment, Liam began to understand something he had only sensed before, that prejudice isn't always about who shouts the loudest. Sometimes it's about who holds the power to make their bias official, to twist authority into a weapon. And in the silent spaces between those acts, a person has to decide whether they'll let it define them or sharpen them. For Liam, the choice was still ahead, but a seed had been planted. The same hands that could steady a basketball in midair would have to learn to steady his own place in the world. The walk from the gym to the parking lot felt endless, the winter air biting at Liam Carter's skin. The faint hum of conversation from other students was broken by bursts of laughter that weren't meant for him, but landed just the same. He kept his eyes on the cracked pavement, gripping the strap of his duffel bag, trying to disappear into motion. But he didn't get far before the sting of a camera lens caught him. Two students leaned against a brick wall, their phones angled in his direction. One mimicked a limp-wristed gesture, the other mouthed words Liam didn't need to hear to understand. A red recording light blinked at him like an unblinking eye. He quickened his pace, but by the time he reached his car, his phone vibrated with the first notification, then another, and another. By evening, the video was everywhere on the school's social feed, in private group chats, even on the accounts of people Liam barely knew. Hundreds of comments piled up beneath it, each one sharpening the wound. Some questioned his ability. Others didn't bother hiding their contempt for what the ribbon on his wrist meant. The internet, like the court, had become another arena, one where the blows landed differently but cut just as deep. For the first time since he had picked up a basketball, the thought crossed his mind, maybe I'm done. Maybe walking away was easier than standing alone against a tide that only seemed to rise. The idea was as heavy as it was tempting. But before it could settle, a voice interrupted the silence. It belonged to Coach Garrison, the man whose name was whispered with respect even among his rivals. Liam turned to see him standing at the edge of the nearly empty parking lot, hands in his jacket pockets, posture calm but deliberate. Garrison explained that he had been watching the storm unfold not just today, but long before, and that it struck a nerve for reasons of his own. He spoke of a younger brother, once a promising athlete, who had been pushed out of his sport simply because he was gay. It was a loss that had haunted Garrison, a chapter he couldn't rewrite, but one he refused to see repeated. Then came the offer, unexpected, impossible to ignore. Garrison wanted Liam on his roster for the championship game, not as a token gesture, but because he believed Liam could change the outcome. It wasn't just skill he valued, it was resilience. Yet even as the invitation settled in the air, another current began to pull against it. Word of the meeting spread faster than Liam could have imagined. Mason and several players from Riverside took to social media with their own version of the story, painting him as a traitor, claiming he had abandoned his team for the spotlight. Screenshots of their posts found their way into his messages, Classmates he barely knew began whispering in hallways, some openly mocking him for selling out to the other side. The decision weighed heavier with each passing hour. Accepting meant stepping directly into a public crossfire. Declining meant letting the same voices that pushed him out decide where his story ended. Under the dim glow of the street lamps that night, Liam realized that the hardest choices aren't always between right and wrong. Sometimes they're between the safe path that preserves your comfort and the harder one that demands you walk straight into the fire, knowing you might get burned. The difference lies in whether you want to live quietly in the shadow of someone else's rules or boldly in the light of your own. The day of the championship arrived under a pale sky, the air outside the arena sharp with the bite of early spring. Inside, the gym was already alive, cheer squads pacing at the sidelines, camera crews threading cables, the echo of bouncing balls marking warm-ups on both sides. Liam Carter stepped through the tunnel wearing the navy and silver jersey of Coach Garrison's team, the fabric unfamiliar yet solid against his skin. Every step toward the court carried the weight of choice, of the road he had chosen in full view of everyone who doubted him. The reaction came in a wave, from the Riverside section of the bleachers. The sound wasn't applause but a low, rolling boo, punctuated by jeers that sharpened into words. Plastic horns blared. Someone in the front row waved a sign reading, "Traitor" in bold, crooked letters. Liam's eyes locked forward, the echo of each insult landing but not slowing his stride. At center court, the first blow came not from the crowd but from authority. Coach Brown stormed toward the scorer's table, gesturing furiously, demanding that Liam be barred from the game. The argument rippled outward, fans leaning in to hear, players standing still on the sidelines. The referee's voice cut through the noise. Liam's presence broke no rules. The game would proceed. From the first whistle, the match was more than a contest for points. Mason, wearing Riverside's colors, shadowed Liam with a presence that was more collision than defense. Shoulders slammed harder than necessary. Elbows found ribs under the guise of fighting for position. Twice. Liam hit the floor, his palms skidding across the polished wood, the taste of iron in his mouth. From the stands, Riverside's supporters hurled water bottles, their plastic arcs catching the overhead lights before thudding against the sideline. Still, the scoreboard ticked forward. Each possession chipped away at the lead, the gap narrowing under the steady rhythm of Garrison's team. Liam's wrist ached from repeated contact, the skin at his temple raw where he'd hit the floor, but his focus tightened instead of fading. The court became a narrowing tunnel, the sound of the crowd muffled by the beat of his own breath. The final seconds unfolded in a blur. Down by 2, Garrison's point guard fed the ball to Liam at the arc. Mason was there instantly, his stance low, arms wide, daring Liam to risk the shot. The weight of the season pressed into that single moment. The memory of every insult, every stolen locker, every public dismissal folding into the space between heartbeats. Liam rose above the arc, releasing the ball into a perfect spiral. Time slowed, the gym holding its breath as it spun high against the lights. It struck the rim, kissed the backboard, and dropped cleanly through the net. The scoreboard flipped, the buzzer blared, and the navy and silver bench erupted. For the first time in their history, Garrison's team had defeated Riverside in a championship game. Players swarmed Liam, the floor trembling under the stamp of sneakers and the roar of a different kind of crowd. As the noise washed over him, Liam realized that victory in this moment was about more than the title. It was proof that endurance could be louder than hate, that the persistence to keep showing up, to keep standing, could change the outcome, not just of a game, but of a life. The buzzer's echo was still hanging in the rafters when Coach Brown forced his way through the crush of players and photographers. His voice cut sharply over the celebration. Each word meant to slice through the moment. He didn't mention the score, the play, or the championship trophy still gleaming under the lights. Instead, he turned toward the row of scouts and media at the edge of the court, his tone cold and calculated. "He's gay," Brown announced, loud enough to carry to every corner of the gym. "Don't waste your time." The roar of the crowd faltered. pockets of silence blooming in the stands. Liam Carter felt the shift in the air, not the shock of the reveal, because the ribbon on his wrist had never been a secret, but the way it was weaponized here, at the height of his victory, as though it could erase everything that had just happened. From the VIP section, a figure stood. Coach Nick Ronan of UCLA moved down the steps with a deliberate calm, his expression unreadable until he reached the center of the court. He looked first at Brown, then at Liam, then back to the scouts, and then was the captain. With a slow, certain smile, he spoke. "Perfect," Ronan said, his voice carrying above the murmur that had begun to rise again. "We're looking for players who can win games and fight battles worth winning." His gaze locked on Liam. "We've been following you for a while, but today you showed more than skill. You showed that you can stand in the center of a storm and still lead your team to victory." The words landed like an anchor in a turbulent sea. Ronan reached into his bag, pulling out a crisp contract embossed with UCLA's crest. Right there, under the gaze of hundreds of fans, reporters, and cameras, he held it out for Liam to see. The offer wasn't tentative, it was final. Around them, the crowd began to move again, this time with a different energy. From the bleachers, a section erupted in cheers as Daniel, face alight with pride, stood holding a wide rainbow flag above his head. One by one, others joined in, raising smaller flags, wearing pins, letting the color fill the space where hate had tried to root itself only moments earlier. Brown stood frozen, his attempt to reduce Liam to a label, now outshone by the contract being signed in front of him. Mason, a few steps away, dropped his gaze to the floor, the smirk that had followed Liam for weeks gone without a trace. As Liam's pen met the page, the cameras caught the moment the handshake between him and Ronan, the flash of the rainbow ribbon at his wrist, the scoreboard still bearing the final score. It wasn't just a signing, it was the closing of one chapter and the defiant start of another. Walking off the court, Liam understood something with clarity. The truth doesn't need to be hidden when it's the very thing that gives you strength. And sometimes the best response to being underestimated is to make sure the entire world sees you succeed exactly as you are. If you were standing there in that gym, would you have stayed silent or stood up like Daniel did? Tell me in the comments, your answer might be the spark someone else needs. And for more stories where resilience wins over prejudice, follow Heart Story so you never miss what happens next.